New People, New Ways, a podcast in partnership with Fresh Expressions Florida and Fresh Expressions United Methodist that explores new ways of being church through the stories and insights of scholars and practitioners alike. I'm Piper Ramsey Sumner, a layperson and cultivator of Fresh Expressions for the Florida Conference.
And I'm Michael Adam Beck. I am the director of Fresh Expressions Florida and the director of Fresh Expressions UM. And today we are joined by my friends Mark and Emma Cotterill, and they work for the Salvation Army, planting spiritual communities and equipping leaders in Manchester, UK, and Helsingborg, Sweden. Emma and Mark founded a network for pioneer leaders called Venture 12. And Mark is a coach, consultant with 5Q, a resource for leaders that uses the ministry assessment tool, APEST, Apostles, Prophets, Evangelists, Shepherds, Teachers. And Emma is the partnership director of the Movement Leaders Collective, which overlooks 64 organizations and 550 leaders worldwide that are working to build movements and increase kingdom impact. And I'm one of those people that get to be part of all that beautiful work.
Welcome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Great to be with you.
Yes, we appreciate you being there. It's 3 p.m. our time and it's 9 p.m. your time, if that's right. Yeah, so we appreciate you hanging out with us tonight.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Time well spent.
Yes, good. So the first questions we like to ask, this will be a two-part. I want both of you to answer. So I want to know, who is Emma and who is Mark? Tell us about yourselves.
I guess I would say that I am a woman. I am a leader. I love Jesus. I'm excited about bringing about change in different ways in the world. I'm a human rights lawyer. I am exploring movement together with people who want to be more movemental or missional, to put it in a different way, in the world, to bring about change for the kingdom. I'm a mum and I'm a wife and lots of other things. I love dancing.
So do I. I'm not as good. I'm Mark, and I'm a husband. I'm a father of two amazing young boys. I love football, which is soccer, I guess, in your language.
Right. Yeah.
Just a bit of contextualization there.
Thanks for translating. Yeah.
Why do you call it football? Anyway, we'll take that another time. That's possibly my first love. Obviously, family, and I have been until recently a church leader, local church leader. So fascinated about the experience and potential of the local church in communities, but ultimately more fascinated still at this age with Jesus. So it keeps me on my toes, keeps me learning, and yeah.
Nice dynamic duo couple here joining us. So
thank you.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your church plant in Sweden and how it influences the way you view kind of mission and ministry.
Well, for me, I have always had a heart for justice and make sense of my own faith and my own experience of Jesus through sort of activism and engaging with the poor, and particularly have a heart for people who have been victims of human trafficking. So that was really at the forefront of my mind coming into the church plant in Helsingborg. We'd come from a plant in Manchester, and I felt drawn to explore how could we build a missional community where serving that group of marginalized people, which are very much hidden in our communities in Sweden, primarily so. How could we build that in to the church plant and to exploring what mission looks like, and raising up, perhaps even raising leaders through the people who've suffered that type of trauma. So that was my heart going into planting in Helsingborg.
I mean, yeah, just to riff off that, I think from our experience, the most interesting forms of church have always had a kind of prophetic dynamic to them. So a real sense of listening to the community and the church becoming an experience, or more than just an experience, but kind of like a contrast community, emerging into some kind of contrast community that models something different, and to the surrounding community. So that prophetic kind of aspect to our pioneering and church planting has always been one of the front wheels. So always going in with listening, always going in what's lovable about the city, what's unlovable, where's the brokenness, where's the beauty. And so coming to Helsingborg, particularly around the trafficking journey, that was one of the first, in the first few months, we became very conscious of that reality within the city of Helsingborg.
And exploring together as part of that kind of listening journey, where we can partner with other agencies and support initiatives that are already there, as well as be an answer to things that are not there, and be bridge builders and being part of a solution that's needed. So finding our place in the community, as opposed to deciding beforehand, this is what we're going to be and this is who we are, but finding our feet in the local community as outsiders of that community, by starting to build those relationships. And yeah, that's been an 8-year journey now, and we've been able to see that grow. And just experiencing how God has, enabled us to be part of his building work, really. To transform individual lives, but also to start to change a city, and in the last couple of years, a nation, through the learning that we've done here, which is really exciting to get to be part of.
Yeah, for those, like obviously most of our listeners are going to be on this side of the pond, the U.S. American area over here. Help us understand, like, I would say, we're starting to get on like the front side of post-Christendom and secularization and all those things, but you all are from our future significantly, like maybe even decades, where it's even more averse to any kind of really church or church planting. So could you help us understand, like, maybe some of the differences in your context?
Yeah, I think they say that Sweden is the second most secularized country in the world, after probably, I can't remember if it's Norway or Denmark first, but it's certainly a very secularized country. It used to be a Christian country a couple of generations ago, but we've encountered, that has just changed at a really rapid speed. And we are in the part of the country that is the most secular part of the second most secularized part of the country. So there's really no kind of memory, as it were, living memory of revival or anything like that here. So if you're talking about spiritual atmosphere and kind of familiarity with Christianity, it's really not there. There are some denominations here. I would say primarily it's nominal Christianity, if there is anything, and people struggle to plant. People who try to plant here will really struggle. It's a harsh environment for missional people. I would say that if you would go and share with your doctor that you heard the voice of God, you'd probably be diagnosed with schizophrenia or something like that, because it's just not commonplace to talk like that. Even the memory of the Christian faith is slightly offensive to people. So it's probably more politically and socially acceptable to be a Muslim in our country today than it is to be a Christian. And people really would struggle with sharing that they are a Christian oftentimes, and with having a conversation with somebody who would say that they're a Christian, because it would be perceived as very old-fashioned. And
I think a practical way of describing it is when we were in England, and for example, if we were running a youth club, the police would sometimes rock up at the door and just see how we were doing. They were kind of interested what was going on in the church. In Sweden, that doesn't happen. There's a disinterest, and in many ways, it's almost like the rest of society and the agencies and actors within in cities and communities disregard the church in terms of it having any kind of potential fruitful contribution to the welfare of the streets and the cities. And that's different to the UK. So that's maybe just another way of describing the climate, but it's also laced with enormous potential.
Yeah. There's absolutely no status involved in being a minister or church leader. It's quite the opposite. So this whole fame thing that you've got going on amongst leaders in the US is very alien here.
Yeah. So if you're a church leader, someone asks you what you do. If someone asks you what you do, you're at a party. You over the years you learn to think of different ways of explaining what you do, so you don't shut the conversation down. So
the whole fame thing's pretty alien to Jesus too. So that But I was wondering on that, like, so I'm a student, kind of Charles Taylor and his work on the secular age, and he talks about the immanent frame, basically, that in a secularized society, people just dismiss entirely the possibility of a divine actor that can like move and penetrate our reality, or that there even is such a thing. So is that part of the massive kind of push to this is like not even kind of thinking that that's a possibility? Or is it that the church has done so much trauma and harm, and that there's just this legacy of like slavery and homophobia and, patriarchy that is Swedish people in general just kind of over the church because it's just associated with so much negativity?
Yeah, I think it's a mix of all of that. I mean, it's seen as fundamentally irrational to believe in a divine being. We're very much kind of science-based as a culture these days. So as evolved humans, it would be expected that you are past the fantasies of a creator God and have now come to understand the reality of whatever other scientific evidence is out there. And there would not be a sense that you could combine or engage both dialogues on that. There is also quite a lot of church trauma, I would say. I mean, Me Too blew up here just as it did in many parts of the world. That's kind of still living with us, I think, in many of the denominations. You have the legacy of kind of very religious rules and regulations for like my parents and my grandparents' generation that people are still responding against. So the church having the kind of legalistic way of engaging the salvation conversation, and particularly leaning in, because actually the Free Church had a big role in bringing about change when it came to alcoholism in this country, in a positive way. But people don't necessarily remember that initial part of the story. They remember the aftermath of it turning into a sort of religious rules and regulations and restricting people from doing things that appeared, that they would enjoy. Don't go out dancing, don't play the drums, that's the devil's instrument, and all of those kind of things. So it's going to be a mix. But fundamentally, I think it's the individualism that is the overriding factor, I would say, that we want to be able to believe that we are ourselves in charge of our own destiny, and we definitely don't want to be seen as foolish, but we want to be enlightened, intellectual beings in this world.
It's interesting because I definitely think in America, one thing, even if people are becoming less religious, a lot of people are still very spiritual. There's that idea of spiritual but not religious. So a lot of people just still have an interest and are, they're okay maybe with the idea of something, a spiritual world or something bigger than themselves, or believing in God. So that's interesting that that kind of a different kind of, a more kind of staunch atheism that seems like to be in part of the culture. But something I noticed when you both were talking about your church planting experience, much of what it's rooted in is justice work and in caring for people, not just their souls, but for their lives, for their everyday lives, and creating places of safety and of care. And something you mentioned, individualism, you're offering the opposite of that. You're saying, let's live in community together. Let's be a part of this, of a movement together. And so that makes me think, because, the Salvation Army has similar kind of Wesleyan roots with the Methodists. And I grew up in the Church of the Nazarene. So there's a lot of the Wesleyan kind of things are all brewing around us right now. But that was what, the early Methodists, a lot of what they were offering to people is the community aspect. It's your well-being. They were visiting people in prison. They were helping people get training and education so that they could care for themselves and care for their families. And so that's what I see you both doing as well. And I think if there was any approach to creating church and doing church and building a movement in your context, it feels like that would be the way to do it, because it's hard to argue against people doing justice work, no matter what your religion is, I would think. Religion or not religion.
Well, I mean, there are huge needs in Sweden. It's a hugely segregated country. We've had huge waves of refugees come in through 2015, a massive refugee crisis. So there are lots of social issues. And there's lots of need. And so, I mean, our experience has always been, and how we've also learned on the road is that the gospel and good news is always hope embodied. And that's really the only way people really get it. Certainly when you've had a Christian tradition which has spoken a lot and been very, taking positions on certain things, the only kind of gateway into making a difference in the city is to stand in solidarity and to become part of the community, part of the stories, part of the narrative, to immerse ourselves into the pains and the joys, and that's really been our experience. It's out of that where hope emerges, and where the kind of, I mean, we describe our church in Helsingborg as a community of micro churches or missional communities. So they look very, very different, but all of them have some aspect of firstly being centered on mission. So a real sensitivity to what's going on in the city, and with a real kind of lean into meeting real needs, real expressed needs within our city. So, and that expresses it differently, but depending on which micro church or missional community it's about. So yeah, but it's been, our journey has really been that the church is always an expression of hope embodied and incarnated. Words are really good, but flesh, we've learned, is harder. Unfortunately, it's really easy to speak. I mean, I wish I lived out most of the things I preached. I'd be in a much better place, and so would the church. But time and time again, that's been our lesson, that change really happens with a real deep commitment to giving ourselves away rather than drawing to, and that always leads to real incarnated impact. Good news, yeah.
Yeah, and we find as well, because we are, which may be helpful to your listeners if they are not experiencing the level of secularization that we are living through here, that when you are in a situation where you're planting a church and you literally you have to, you're not going to get people coming to join something like what we're doing for the fun of it, because like it's hard work to do justice work. Essentially what you're recruiting from is a pool of people who will be the same people that you're serving. So it will be vulnerable people. They're the kind of people that will join. And so you really do need to do pre-conversion discipleship in order to make some kind of change in the city, if that's what you're passionate about doing. And that's really quite an interesting process and journey to be going through. And just realizing, I mean, it's a humbling journey in the sense that we can't come as a community and save anybody because the problem's too big. I'm not going to be able to launch into a new campus with 20 people to change something. I haven't got the gravitas. I haven't got the people to make a big statement. I've got a partner, which is humbling in itself, that the church has got to partner with others who are wanting to do good things, which means I'm going to have to compromise, not on my integrity and my basic values, but I'm going to have to work with people who are not like me, and I'm going to have to do that in a way where, if I feel that I'm called to lead an initiative, like I felt we were called to lead an initiative on anti-trafficking, by showing people the way forward in terms of reaching out to a people group that was not being reached previously. And so you're showing people who actually don't believe in Jesus what it is like to meet the needs of people who are not seen, who don't have a voice, who are hidden away, who are being exploited, and that it is worthwhile to stop that exploitation and to work towards actually that person being able to contribute through their life, whether or not they become a Christian. And so it's a different kind of building work, I think, than when you have more resources, more people that you can go with. It's been a really interesting journey, working with police officers who are very much, would profess to be atheists, but who are moved by being able to help someone in a very tangible way, because somebody's been able to show them how to reach out rather than using the normal ways that they would potentially be engaging with that group of people, seeing, there are other ways to communicate and actually get to the point that you're wanting to get to, but also to support this person.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like your approach is very much like Jesus, right? Who started with, going to the synagogue and proclaiming, "The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is upon me. He's anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor, to bind up the brokenhearted, liberate the oppressed, proclaim jubilee," all those things. And then as he did those things, like a community, these little communities started to spring up around that activity, that justice, that liberation. And it was usually with the throwaways of society, the marginalized and the people outside the bounds of religious and cultural power. And I wonder if we got away with it for a while in Christendom, where we could just kind of prop up buildings and have people come to those and start with a service. But now we're in a space where we really have to start where Jesus started, as he did, and is continuing to do that in the world today too. And the thing, pastors are not necessarily trusted in the United States either. There was just a study that came out that chiropractors are more trusted than clergy in the United States.
Wow.
That's an interesting study to do, but yeah.
Wow. Yeah, who paid for that study?
Right?
It's good to know, right?
The Association of Chiropractors. No.
I think it's important, isn't it? I mean, we're with our micro churches, discipleship is, and I guess that's a conversation that's happening on a new level across the church everywhere. I think in some places it feels like it can become very. I mean, this is harsh, but it sometimes sounds like it's like, how do we get better at recruiting people to our brand of religion or church? And it can become very systematic. And Matthew 28 is front and center of that. And in many ways, that's really good. And we're all being called to this conversation and working out what discipleship looks like. But if it's disconnected from, say, like Luke 4:18. Which is like when Jesus announces what he's about, his mission. If those two kind of things are disconnected, discipleship has ultimately got to be missional, and it's got to be in sync with the kind of smell and taste and feel of how we know Jesus is revealed in the scriptures. So in all of our micro churches, we make a big deal. I don't know if that's the right thing to say, that it is about being present in communities. Discipleship is multi-sensory. It's not just in the classroom or learning a set of doctrines. It's about being released to be as all of us are together. We need each other to encourage each other to be the body, to be the presence of Christ in the midst of a real anxious culture, segregated culture where there are racial tensions, and to kind of say that this is not just our city's problem. This is to do with the church. This is to do with our spiritual formation. So we make a big deal of making sure that our discipleship is rooted in that kind of impulse of opening the eyes of the blind and good news to the poor, and captives being released. And sometimes we kind of in some places it just feels like it's disconnected from that.
It makes a lot of sense for our community as well, because the majority of the people that are part of our community are people that we've served in different ways in the past. So we have a very multicultural community, people from Afghanistan, Iran, Nigeria, what other countries? China,
Ethiopia.
Eritrea.
Yeah.
It's just all over the shop. And I would say that the majority of people have some kind of refugee/asylum background, and a lot of them have received support with their legal status at one point or another. It's like the standard is photocopying paperwork to the migration board after church on a Sunday. It's like, oh, here we go again. Can you help me with this letter? Yeah, of course I can, for the 1,000th time. But it comes natural. We fostered an environment where those types of people feel welcome, but they're also discipled into supporting others from the beginning. So we try not to make people just service users, but actually to
I was sitting with a guy who it was just a off the cuff conversation. He's from China, and so he can't speak Swedish, can't speak English, so the conversation's through Google Translate. And he's telling me that he comes to faith. I don't know when it was, about a year ago maybe, and he was telling me that now their situation is really, really tough. But he was just telling me through Google Translate, they're at our house over Christmas, that he had tried to tell everybody who he grew up, so he's my age, from his class at school, about Jesus. So this is in China. He's on some kind of, I don't know, their equivalent of WhatsApp. And he said that every single one of them, many of them just ignored him or rejected him. But one person got saved through his conversation, this girl in his class. And he was showing me this girl who's got this profile on some social media thing, and she's preaching the gospel in some kind of social media platform in China. And I just said, is she not afraid of what might happen? And he's asked her that, and she said she doesn't care. She just keeps doing it. So, I mean, these people who come through these journeys of, real precarious journeys. They're, you know, in many ways, they're so easy to write off, and so easy to kind of think we need leaders and all this kind of stuff. We need more people who've got it together. And then you just sat at a conversation. This guy's been discipling or trying to, you know, preach the gospel to his class, and one person gets saved, and now they're just like released.
Yeah.
And there's all another guy from Iran who, a similar story, young guy. It's just like, I mean, I don't know why he never told me this, but he just didn't think to tell me, but that he'd been like discipling some people back in Iran from Sweden, family members. They get saved and they start a house church in Tehran. And it took I said, why did you tell me that? That's, for me, that's like a real big deal. But some of these, I don't know. So there are all these kind of things happen in our community. We're learning that through precarious situations and people who, without the qualifications that we sometimes have, amazing things can happen. That's our learning experience. It's really hard, messy, but time and time again, proved wrong. Or that sounds bad, but it's just.
It's so much more interesting as well to see what God does through these people, like the stories that you get to share and the journeys. I was about 6 years ago spending time with a client of mine in hospital. She was 8 months pregnant and she was due to be deported. She was a victim of human trafficking. And it was a very long story, but we managed anyway to get a doctor's note to say that she wasn't fit to travel, and she ended up having permission to stay for the birth. And then eventually she got leave to remain after like 2 or 3 years of supporting her with legal paperwork. And this week I got to meet with her and her, well, it's not a baby anymore because it's a 6-year-old child who was in her tummy when I was, you know, with her in the hospital. And just to see her and bringing people to church, because I've been friends with her online, but just to be able to see that and just to recognize that, you know, that was an afternoon of my life, to be able to advocate for this lady who didn't know Swedish. And who was due to be deported, and working with her legal situation. And now she's got this lovely, lovely child who's able to live safely in this country. And now she's bringing people to our community because she knows it's a safe place. So, yeah, it's you just know that you're part of God's story, and the kind of the tapestry of lives being woven together in this beautiful mesh of just relationships that would never have formed if it wasn't for church. Because where else are you going to hang out with all these people with these amazing stories? You know, people traveling through Russia on the back of a lorry to escape the Taliban. You know, you're just like, my God, I can't believe I know these people.
Yeah, I think one thing you both mentioned or talked about is like those people that you were able to reach in your work and in your church are now reaching people that you would not be able to reach. You know, I don't know if you know Mandarin, but that man who I'm assuming from China, I assume is speaking Mandarin to people that you wouldn't be able to. The man, you know, speaking to the people in Iran back home in his language, you know, and these people that already know him. And so that's something I think that happens is people want to be the one that can be all things for all people. Like I want to be, you know, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to, you know, save the whole world. That kind of idea, when it's like, no, we are equipped and we are called to what we can do. And that's something that Fresh Expressions does. The Fresh Expressions go to where the traditional church can't go. And then sometimes those Fresh Expressions can't go where other Fresh Expressions can go. And so I love that your church is more of these micro churches. It's and they all probably reach people that wouldn't be reached any other kind of way, that are able to find community in the way that makes the most sense to them and that connects to them on that level. And it's all done through relationship also. that woman that you talked about being there, you being a presence in her life is something that probably saved her life. And then also it brought her back to you because of that connection that you had with each other. I think that's so cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the learning journey, because I've been in the anti-trafficking space for about 13 years in total. And I think the learning journey of that is, you know, it's amazing to be able to help people, but it's even more amazing to be able to give them space to help others and to be able to contribute. Like, that's when you really know that you have made a difference in somebody's life, is that when you are enabling them to contribute. And I think we are guilty a lot of the time in the kind of NGO space of wanting to overhelp or over facilitate people's journeys. And I think COVID taught us that when it comes to leadership development, and we were kind of forced to fast track our micro church processing, that people may not seem ready to us or may not seem mature enough, but actually sometimes maybe we've put the bar too high, and actually people can start to serve and can start to give from the basis of where they are, from the basis of where they stand, and lean into discipleship and leadership at their level. And it's going to be good enough. It's going to be messy and there's going to be mistakes, but actually God can do so much through that. And yeah, I think that really propelled our leadership development, that we were just forced, like we couldn't meet. So we just like, right, you're up, just go.
I mean, the funny thing about COVID was we decentralized everything. So we did nothing from the center. We didn't send any like Sunday teaching or anything like that. So we just said, go and explore what it might look like to be church. And we decided if we would try and kind of see what would happen in our block of flats with the relationships and neighbours. And I mean, when we came back after a year, our efforts didn't work. It just went. But when we came back, I mean, I was the paid Salvation Army officer, and it just didn't work. So no one was showing up, and yeah, whatever. But then when we came back, it was like, there's all these people I didn't know, and they were part of our church. I was like, who are you? So when we go to your church for 9 months, I hadn't even met them. So they're all part of these like communities that we just said, go. And we'll meet as leaders. We'll try and equip you, but we're not going to send any kind of live or video teaching or whatever. We just want you to go and explore what church looks like. So there was a group that formed around hiking, and all different like kinds of groups. But when we came back, it was just funny because there was people who had met, and then there were people who were like leading people that we didn't really know. And I was supposed to be the church leader of this church, so it was a really funny kind of experience that taught us a lot. And when you see something like that, it's really hard to unsee it. In the words of someone we all know quite well, you know, it really, really difficult to unsee that. So,
well, I had a lady just a couple of weeks ago welcoming me to church. Oh, is this your first time? No, I've been before on a Sunday. Like, she's just like taking on the hospitality. I just absolutely loved it. You've got to love it, haven't you? When people are taking ownership and just stepping up.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of things changed. I mean, one of the things was that we definitely lowered the bar of like excellence in order to raise participation. So participation, I guess, became one of the front wheels of everything through COVID. Like, you're in, it's you. We'll see what happens. And when we come back, there's always a tension there. You want to do things really, really good, but sometimes you have to sacrifice that excellence or these kind of like expectations that you have, or we've all grown up in really good expressions of Sunday services or whatever, and we really had to kind of like just take a step back from that in order to release or channel the participatory power within the community of people. And then of course we have our equipping processes as well, and apprenticeship kind of culture that we've tried to work really, really hard on. But I think just making that decision that we were going to lower the bar of excellence in order to release participation within the community was a game changer.
It's funny that you used that word, Mark, because I was in a denominational meeting not a week or two ago, and one of the values that they were trying to set forth that should be like the organizational value was excellence, and I literally went like almost out my mouth a little bit, like,
what was that? Did someone say something?
Yeah. No, let's not do that. So I was pushing strongly against that. But I think you're describing like all these really core movemental dynamics of being a church as a movement. So I'd love for you to talk to us more about. And one of the beautiful things I find, like, it's the Holy Spirit, is there's these kind of similar themes through microchurch, through Fresh Expressions, through all these movemental forms that are less centered, more distributed, less. There's a place for gathering, but there's a place for scattering, and there's releasing of the priesthood of all believers. And there's this similar kind of process that we follow in incarnational mission, right? Listening, building relationships slowly over time, loving and serving the needs that are in the community. And then from that, sharing Jesus and forming church. So you mentioned like your apprenticeship kind of process, how you form people for that. And just like, what are some of the key you find like movemental, the really key pieces of that for this to work, of those movemental dynamics?
I think I'll just jump in, Emma, before, and then you can maybe. So I think one of the things that has been the hardest part, and it's maybe not so talked about whenever we're in circles that are talking about movement, is you touched on it, which triggered me, the listening part. Because what we often find is that we do the listening part often quite well in the first phase of pioneering. But then it's really difficult to come back to doing it again. It's almost like a blow to the ego, because you think you've listened, you've kind of, now we know what we're doing, we've got this vision, the community's forming, we're on a track somewhere. One of the most challenging things, and what I've seen, I mean, I'm not leading the local church anymore, I'm working nationally, is actually going through the cycles of re-listening, relearning. And you talk about context changing so rapidly, and there's such accelerated change at the moment, and that piece of re-listening. But what I'm finding is a real blow to the ego of a church that's finally got it together, and to have that kind of downward journey of re-listening, I think is really crucial, not just for the prophetic kind of sensibility, but also it's a painful spiritual journey at times as well, to kind of say, actually, we don't know. We once again, we're in a place of, so I think, like, I would just say that prophetic element, before we go on to the apostolic maybe stuff, is really, really crucial in movemental stuff, so that it doesn't become just stale strategic movement, next steps, we can do this, but to keep us on track with what God's actually revealing and teaching, not just through the faith community, but outside. So dislocated from that listening journey, I think all the movement conversation runs off on a course that we know where it ends, and we'll always have to come back to repentance. But yeah, so I just want to put that in there. I think that's really, really, really important.
Yeah, it can become a strategic playbook rather than a well thought through. Yeah. I think we've leaned heavily into APEST as well as a team, and that's on the back of nearly burning out, trying to plant a community in Manchester on our own, and not knowing then about those dynamics. And myself, I would say that the socialization of women around the shepherding gift and the teaching gift in particular weighed really heavily on me as an expectation on myself, but also a kind of silent expectation from a Christian community of being then a minister's wife. And so APEST has really, like, the exploration of APEST has been really freeing to me, because I've been able to understand why I don't do shepherding particularly well, because it's actually a gift that I'm relatively low in comparison to some of the other gifts. But also in terms of learning in team, how we navigate strengths and weaknesses of one another, and how we can support one another through that, rather than having static roles based on job descriptions or whatever, leaning into the charismatic giftings that God has given us. And, you know, even if I'm the director of something, if I don't have the answer, because actually it's not my gifting to have the answer, then I'm able to relinquish the responsibility, but also the kind of being humble enough to say, actually, I've got no idea. This is a shepherding situation, you guys. I need a shepherd to speak into this, because otherwise I'm going to bodge it up in some way, shape or form. So can someone come in? And that was a long journey for us as team. And it's really helped us as well in the building the structure of the team initially, but also in our second challenge was, you know, how do we transition, as we were transitioning out of main leadership last year? How do we transition this team now, not out of the team, but how do we move ourselves into, so move myself and Mark out of the central positions and other people into the central positions, because actually now their giftings are needed. It's not about, you know, who's a church leader, who's not, but actually we need now, after X amount of years of needing the apostolic and the prophetic energy to be at the forefront of the venture, we now need the evangelist and the shepherd and the teaching gift to be forefront, because we've got loads of people to look after and we're just rubbish at remembering to keep tabs on people. So we need other people to step up and make sure that we're not losing people, and, you know, keeping the flock moving in the right direction and what have you. So that's been really key.
I think, like, just to add on something of that, one of the things that I was reflecting on this the other day, that what we learned was not to just equip people for the role or the task or the ministry even, but to try and have a kind of consciousness or a commitment to the deeper places of who they were, their calling. So what were they fascinated in? So don't just equip people for task jobs so they can do the job better, but equip people so that they grow as individuals. And that, I think we really, maybe when we didn't do well, but I think we certainly began to think more about that. What are we curious about? Not just what do we need for this moment. So whenever we had team leadership, we're always like, what is God? Who are you? Who are you? What's your calling? What's your, you know, rather than we need you just to help us get this thing done. We had a real kind of,
how do we thrive? All of us.
So always like asking what are you fascinated about? What are you interested in? And making sure that the deeper thing of calling was always central to not just leadership, but to discipleship, and how we could serve them rather than just have them do roles or fulfill tasks, job descriptions. And it just made a much more fun environment as well. When you go to those kind of places, I mean, we made a real thing about, in terms of movement, you need to have like a depth and a tightness that we're a we. And that really only comes about when there's this kind of commitment to one another, that I'm here not just to grow my leadership or to grow my kind of next steps in my ministry, but I'm here to kind of raise you up, because that's what Jesus was doing. That's what Jesus is, that's, any kind of like understanding of how, seeing how Jesus operated, that was just what he was doing. So what does it look like for us to lay our lives down for the other in every environment, in team? And that's really, really hard. But when you at least speak it out and you invite people into those kind of communities, those kind of teams, you get people that they want you to win, and they want you to to do more than just, can you preach well, or they want you to feel good. And it just is it's just much more enjoyable to be part of those kind of teams. And they, then you feel you experience ministry as friendship in a way. I mean, I grew up where there was that, can you be friends on team? Are you allowed to be that? Our experience was actually, that's probably I can't think of any other way really now.
No.
We share life together, we eat together, we're not just bothered about, can you show up and do this job? It's about who you are and who we are together and why God has thrown us together. So yeah, long ramble there, but I think that's really, really important.
Yeah.
That's great. I think that's one of the best things about things like the APEST or any kind of like personality gift assessment, those kinds of things, is just that it helps you to understand the people around you, and that so that you can understand each other's giftedness, and so what do they need and what can they do better than me, so that I can go to you and you can come to me, and it can create a team of people that's not going to be too heavy on one side or the other. You can find that balance, and then you can walk through it together. And I love that idea. It's like how being friends with each other, being connected, being on that journey in that relationship all the way along the way. I think that's so cool. And that's something that I think a lot of teams can definitely learn from when it comes to the church. There's kind of a typical pathway that a lot of people follow, that I guess, it's worked in general ways for a while now, but I love, like, I think, Michael, you do that as well really wonderfully at your church. You are always bringing on new leaders and always lifting people up. So I'm seeing that all the time with what you're doing. But we don't have too much longer because I don't want to keep you, because I know it's late. But one of the last questions, we probably could talk about this, I feel like, for hours, but one of the last questions that we ask, and we always like to ask, is what does the future of the church look like to you, and what is your hope?
I would be excited to see the church more diverse in its expression. I think I've just come back from a trip to Ethiopia and Kenya, walking with people on their journeys there, and just being so moved by their spirituality, talking about the dryness that we experience here, and just being reinvigorated by just spending time with them. And I just really hope that there will be that the West, if we can talk about the West, it's a very big part of the globe as well, but that we would be humble enough to listen to some of the stories and the experiences that are coming from the continent of Africa, parts of Asia. I think we need their voices and their stories. So I would hope that the peril that we find ourselves in will make us desperate enough to start listening to them. And the same for marginalized communities, people whose voices haven't been heard. I'm definitely of the opinion that it will be particularly Black and brown women who will come with some of the solutions and the creative innovation, because I think God wants to empower them in particular in this time, and also because I think the hardship makes you more prone to innovate and be creative in a way that privilege prevents you from being. So that's what I'm hoping the church will lean into, but we'll see.
I'm not really sure what the future of the church is going to look like, but what I hope and what I'm seeing maybe the seeds of hope in some places is that it will be maybe less caught up in taking positional statements or issues on stuff, perhaps a bit less verbal and a little bit more playful and fun, incarnated, finding itself in the nooks and crannies of society, more concerned with the heart of our cities and communities rather than taking issues on, or getting caught up in arguments about XYZ. I think that it's going to be led by a kind of people that we're perhaps not ready for. I think it's going to be less, it's going to be certainly co-vocational, bivocational. I really, really hope, and this is maybe me, I don't know if it will be, but I have a soft spot for it. I hope it will look more creative and like surprising. I mean, I lead a community in the pub, and it's just brilliant. I really love it. But I think it's going to be even more creative and wacky than those kind of expressions, and that's my soft spot. That's what I would love to see. I think ultimately it's going to be multi-expression, multi-model. I think anyone who's wedded to a certain model, they need to kind of loosen up a bit, stop taking themselves too seriously, and chill out, because the future is not there. It's going to be much more fluid and diverse, and our churches won't live as long as they perhaps used to, but the impact will be exponentially different and equally beautiful, I think. And then I agree with Emma massively, and I want to underline that. I think that the female voice, particularly around the pioneering, the apostolic, and the future of the church, is one of the crucial pieces to the jigsaw for whatever's coming next, because we've been massively led by, certainly when you gather to any kind of conference around pioneering church planting, is 90% white male often, and that is in the future. So I can't see any other future without us really kind of having the courage to really shift some conversations and change some teams or change some structures, and make sure that we are listening to the unique perspectives of the female apostolic, because it won't sound the same as the male voice, and I think that's really, really important for what's coming next. And then there's God. So I'm really grateful for that, because ultimately we need a fresh move of we always do, don't we? But we really need, I mean, all our strategies and stuff like that, it can be really good. There's a lot of clever people in church and movemental conversations, but ultimately what we need is just something really new and a beautiful move of God that we all get caught up in, rather than instigating.
Mark, you said something really beautiful that I want to just kind of piggyback on, about like the structural nature of, well, kind of where we started at the beginning of our conversation. Emma, your work, I feel like when you talk about justice, when you two talk about justice, think of the biblical concept of mishpat. It's not like punishing the heck out of people, or, you know, retribution, but it's lifting up the lowly and the oppressed. It's toppling the systemic kind of imperial things that force the oppression. So for a long time, like, women in leadership was a justice issue, right? And thankfully, women leaders and pioneers challenged that injustice for many, many years, to where I feel like, at least in most camps, there's an awakening in that space, right? But then, like with your work with human trafficking, you're not just helping the people that are in front of you. You are doing that, but you're also, through your, you know, legal abilities and such, kind of thinking systemically about what are the systems that perpetuate that injustice, and how is your ministry like intersecting and actually changing those systems too. So I really appreciate that. But the structural part, I think, unfortunately, I'll say, in most of the denominational systems that I'm a part of, they actually benefit in keeping it mostly white dudes in the room of decision making, and perpetuating kind of this clergy caste system, and this more, like, Mark, you've said it multiple times, focusing on orthodoxy and right praise and right words, and really neglecting orthopraxy and orthocardia and orthopathos, like a right heart before God and a right way that we live that out in the world. And when I look at what you all are doing, I feel like we are kind of seeing the future in a sense. From our side of the pond, what you all are doing is like a light and a trail blazing into a new space. So I hope that our listeners can gather that from this conversation and see how you're going about all of these things and keeping justice and compassion as kind of the center of what you're doing there with your church planning and movemental church planning. This is over. I know we're over time. I just got I've planted a lot of like micro churches, fresh expressions type stuff, but still I love this church called the United Methodist Church, which saved me and birthed me and pulled me out of the gutter when I was a drug addicted, orphan child. So there's a commitment that I have to that. But then I also feel this tension and this angst of like, but it sucks so bad, right? There's so many parts of it that are we're just exiling all these apes, and we're losing all these young people and people of color, and that could be so integral to our future, and our system is just not ready for them yet. So sorry, that was a little tangent that I just went on, and
I feel you there. I'm with you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I feel the same.
We're in the Salvation Army, so we know exactly how you feel.
Yeah.
I
think it's also like, I mean, I've been reflecting on this a lot recently about there are multiple narratives about what's actually happening, and sometimes we over lean into one narrative which we allow to dominate. And I think that's not to kind of switch off from that. I mean, that's real, but there are also multiple narratives of death and resurrection of the kingdom. And they all speak into every given moment. They're always fully present because Christ is always fully given. And I think that's also our calling in this moment, is to kind of like hold all of those narratives and not to be over stretched or over like pulled into that narrative of decline or disorientation, which is very real, but to hold it together with which we know, I mean, death and resurrection is everywhere for those who have the eyes to see it, but it's central to our faith, and we always have to recognize that that's another very true story of what's happening all the time right now, which gives us a sense of presence that I think the church is called to be unique in that. So I feel the tension of the old world, and that's going, and a scary new world that's coming. But God is good.
Amen.
Yeah. Well, where can our listeners find what you two are up to online? Ooh, and tell us about your podcast too.
Oh, we like to talk about stuff, so we do that regularly on our podcast, the Venture 12 podcast. We don't have a lot of answers, but we have a lot of opinions, and try to have reasonably experienced opinions on some things, but also invite guests who know a lot more about various things than we do, to enable reflection and conversation, because it's we try and pick topics that impact at least the things that we're doing and experiencing in Europe, but we have a worldwide audience, so I think it's relevant for a lot of different contexts.
Yeah, we've had Michael on there, which was a real treat. So, I mean, I've gone back to listen to that several times and just stealing stuff, so I hope you don't mind. Using that in various contexts, but we try to hold all those, what we think are the key spaces of mission, faith exploration, and justice questions, and in the middle of that, what it means to lead in all of that. So it's quite broad, but we hope people enjoy it. How do you find us? Well, I'm quite hard to find. I don't have a website or anything like that. I live at Askergarten 1B. My postcode is. So you can write to me. Now you can
snail mail.
Emma, you right? We're on socials.
I'm on various things, but yeah, go through Venture 12 on Spotify or Apple Play, and you'll find our Facebook page through there, and then you can send a direct message if you want to get in touch with us.
Cool.
Awesome. Cool. Any last thoughts? Any last things I want to talk to our audience?
Mate, you go for it.
Well, I've got a lot of things to say about Florida. I mean, there's a lot of human trafficking there.
Oh,
Apparently.
I'm not surprised. Yeah.
It's one of the states with the most human trafficking in the United States. So we could talk about that and changing laws and things like that. But other than that, I think on the church side of things, I think use the time that you have before secularization has kind of got a hold, to make sure that you train your leaders, that you get yourself set up for what's coming, and the changes that are happening, because there seems to be still time on your side of the water, and being ready. So the sense of readiness and the ability to still give into not just the wider United States, but still the possibility to share with others the learning and the experience, because there's a lot of key learning that's still happening in the US that other people can benefit from. So I would say that's key, at the same time as being humble enough, of course, as all of us Westerners have to be, to receive from particularly the global South and marginalized communities. But practically speaking, equip your leaders. You're going to need them. You need to be ready. It's going to be hard work, but it'll be fun too.
Well, I could add. I mean, this has been a great conversation. If there's anything to, I mean, interesting today. I've discovered that the Arabic word for mercy is connected to this idea of being womb-like. So mercy is connected to this being womb-like, mother-likeness, and it's also in Hebrew as well. The word is like connected to being womb-like. I was really like captured by that. I just sense that there's something about the future of the church, with whatever is being birthed or incubated or whatever. It's going to be gentle. It's going to be perhaps more mother-like, giving, and like mothers do, giving oneself away. With that kind of heart, and I think, I don't know, that stirred me today. So I'll leave that with you.
Good.
Awesome. Well, thank you both, Emma and Mark, for joining us for this episode. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you. And to those listening, thanks for joining in on this episode of New People, New Ways. If you enjoyed our conversation with Emma and Mark, please share it with a friend. And if you would like to learn more about Fresh Expressions, you can check out freshexpressionsfl.org. Find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. See you next time on New People, New Ways.